Morning. Welcome to Show Studio's live panel discussions. In these discussions, experts from all parts of the industry discuss and debate the most important Fashion Week shows of the season. Today, in the midst of, at the very beginning of London Fashion Week, on the first day, we're going to be discussing the future and the relevance of Fashion Weeks themselves. So I'm delighted to be joined here by an amazing panel, who I'll just quickly introduce. We have Orsola de Castro, who's the creative director of Fashion Revolution, an educator, designer, lots of things. Everybody's lots of things. Alice Wilby, who's an educator, activist, creative. Rahemur Rahman, amazing designer. We have Slade Edmondson, who is a thought leader, change maker, creative. Stavros Karelis, who is the founder and buying director of Machine. And you also work with emerging talent for the British Fashion Council.
Yes, correct.
And many other things.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's start. So today we're going to be reimagining the future of Fashion Weeks in the face of the existential threat that is the climate breakdown that we're currently in the middle of. So I want to start with Alice.
Yes. Good morning.
Okay, so is it right that Fashion Weeks are going ahead this month? It's not just London. We've just had New York, and we've got Paris and Milan, and in fact the rest of the world. Should we be actually having these parades of fashion?
Absolutely not. I would suggest that it is, in fact, quite grotesque in this time of existential crisis. We are in the middle of a climate emergency. We have been, people talk a lot about this sort of number of, like, we've got 11 years to sort of fix this. We don't have 11 years to fix it. The UN Secretary General has said that we need to get plans in place by the end of 2020. That's next year. So we have to work very quickly to demand system change, the sort of climate change which we're now facing. And one of the things that we are calling attention to with Extinction Rebellion and our call for London Fashion Week to be cancelled is that if it goes ahead, certainly in February next year, people will be placing orders with brands for collections that will go out past the deadline that the UN has given us to fix climate change. So when you look at it in that context, no, Fashion Week shouldn't be going ahead. We need to reform the platform to draw attention to the climate crisis, ask that the truth about the climate emergency be told, and encourage the industry to come forward and create a new system.
Okay, so we are really in scary times.
Yes.
As a designer, Rahemur, I want to ask you how you feel about that. This is obviously, you're a designer, you have a business, you employ people, I think. You have supply chains, you have, there's a whole system behind you. What do you think is the purpose of Fashion Weeks for you, and how do you see yourself fitting into that?
I think Fashion Week gives designers a platform to actually show their work and sell and make the business. And I think, and this is where the platform needs to be used, I think, a lot better. And I really do agree, like Fashion Week, there needs to be a system change. But I think currently the way that it works, I think it needs to help emerging designers who, like myself, Bethany Williams, Patrick McDowell, who are creating new systems to work in, a bigger platform so that we can show that actually there are different ways to work. And I think that's the way forward. It's actually looking at the new systems that designers are making and support them, actually.
So do you feel you are part of a generation of designers who are changing things who are responding to
100%.
for change?
Yeah, because I think a lot of the conversations that I'm having, especially with a lot of my friends who are designers, a lot of us show during Fashion Week, and myself, I've taken the decision to kind of not do men's Fashion Week, like do a full collection. It's going to be much more like a social enterprise, like interdisciplinary, like interactive fashion showcase more than it will be a show of just clothes. And I think a lot more other designers are pushing the realm as to what a fashion show can be and what London Fashion Week means. And I think it needs to step away from just a parade of just clothes to buy, to be much more about changing narratives.
Okay, and let's just have a think about what a conventional fashion show looks like. If we think about the wastefulness, the carbon footprint of the shows themselves, there's the flights, the lights, the single-use sets, the flowers. The flowers. You know, it's just kind of off the scale, really. And when you think about, you know, shows that happened recently, like there was an uproar about Saint Laurent showing on the beach in Malibu, which seemed to be totally tone deaf, you know, again. Ursula, what do you feel about the waste and the...
Well, I mean, I think anybody feels shocked about the waste, especially because it's fleeting. It doesn't last any time at all. But I do believe, I'm a little bit in between what you guys were saying, in the sense that I totally know that there is an emergency. Most of us do. But I also believe that we need to act in unison. So to cancel one without cancelling all of the others is actually completely irrelevant, because decreasing the impact of one might increase the impact of the others. So for me, the idea, first of all, is that all fashion weeks have to operate as what they are, an organism, and be aware of what the other is doing. Second, transport. Nighttime trains. In fact, I know a campaign will launch soon to actually encourage people to travel by night on cheap trains. Third, policies, rigorous policies against every single type of plastic, be it a straw or a clothes cover. Third, waste. All shows must be zero waste. So there are ways to implement rigor and make Fashion Week about that rigor, because they have become exclusively about spectacle, and spectacle is excess. And excess, I agree with you, right now it looks appalling, but we have an opportunity to use the fact that we have the entire fashion community to talk about really difficult things within the fashion weeks. We have to disinvest from growing and reinvest in social and environmental prosperity throughout the supply chain. If we can talk about that and be rigorous about everything else, and if we can hope that those orders placed in February are exclusively for the kind of fashion that invigorates rather than depletes, then maybe we stand a chance.
Okay. Emma, what do you think about this new kind of fashion that invigorates rather than depletes? You've worked for a long time in this space and founded Charity Fashion Live. Can you tell us a bit about that and how maybe we can weave something around the...
Yeah, so I started Charity Fashion Live back in 2009, I think it was, because I was deeply concerned about the level of waste within fashion and the fashion industry itself. And I myself have always lived with the mentality that, you know, it's kind of a second-hand first mentality, really. And I felt that there wasn't really anything promoting either an NGO or a sustainable retailer in a way that they could really get on board with London Fashion Week. And so I thought, what's the best way of doing that? And how could I also encourage people to shop second-hand, you know, really utilize second-hand textiles? And so I decided that the best way of proving the worth of second-hand would be to recreate London Fashion Week shows in real time as they came out on the catwalk, using only what could be found in a single charity shop in partnership with a charity. And what I found is that there was so much engagement with this, way more than I ever expected. I didn't even know if it was going to work at first, whether I was actually going to be able to recreate these looks as soon as they came out on the catwalk. But instinctively I felt that I could. Instinctively I knew the worth of those textiles that were there and ready to be used. And there was such a sort of swelling of support, particularly from younger people who wanted to get involved, who wanted to be included, and who felt that London Fashion Week was currently not inclusive for them. It felt exclusive, it wasn't accessible. And I think that that's one of the things that really needs to be tackled. I think this is a two-pronged approach. It's about making change from inside the industry, but also I work really heavily in behaviour change, consumer behaviour change, specifically around sustainability and second-hand. And I think that, you know, there is so much power with the people, and we need to bring those two things together. And so if we made Fashion Week a cultural hub where people could really dig into, you know, the cultural meaning of fashion rather than the meaning of trends and, you know, newness. And I mean, there's so much innovation at the moment going on within the industry and moving away from newness and different modes of obtaining newness, so it's less about ownership. And it's just different modes of doing style and fashion. And I think that Fashion Week could really become a hub for exploring those alternatives, for talking about those alternatives and heroing everything from secondhand to rental. I mean, why not have curators celebrated just as designers are? Curated collections that walk the catwalk, and curators become heroes. So we hero secondhand in that way. Why not hero, rental as collections or modification? Sorry, I'm sort of...
Yeah, well, I mean, bringing Stavros in here, because obviously, how do you, as a buyer, think about these new modes of newness, and how obviously the resale market is estimated to be, go off the scale in the next kind of 5 years or so.
Yes, absolutely.
How are you responding to that? And how, as a buyer, do you feel a responsibility towards buying the right stuff?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm going to go through this. I just want, really quick to mention about the London Fashion Week and the whole discussion we're having. I mean, I think it's an extremely healthy debate, in terms of what we can introduce, and actually, a think tank, people that they have the knowledge and expertise and experience, to consult. And I think there is the right moment, because of course there is urgency, but at the same time there is an openness and there is a will for everyone to change right now. So people are listening, and the right experts are listening. So I'm a bit reluctant in a way of dismissing an organization or institution where has supported such a vast number, not just of designers and emerging designers and businesses and local businesses and local enterprises, but we're talking about a huge industry that is supporting so many different trades within UK, but also internationally. So I think that definitely there is an urge of change, and London Fashion Week and the British Fashion Council, is quite open, and I think it's one of the most open councils actually, that to listen into all this positive advice and how they can reintroduce things and change things. So I think I completely agree with you also, we're somewhere in between. It's definitely a shift to change, but also I wouldn't cancel the work of a great institution where has supported a vast number of designers. I mean, we are part of New Gen, for example, both Orsola and I, and when we see designers and emerging designers, the discussion is about sustainability, is about where you're resourcing your fabrics, how you make it. Orsola has been a great member of this panel committee as an expert, to be able to advise them correctly, because I think is the lack of knowledge and the lack of experience and the lack of expertise of what they're supposed to be doing correctly. Now, as a buyer, to go to your question, definitely it can become daunting and exhausting, in terms of fashion weeks. I am very close with so many young designers, and I'm talking on a daily basis about how costly it is, for example, how difficult it is, how is everyone in that super quick pace of showing, producing, and of course, from in sustainable terms, it's nothing positive, I would say, at the moment. But as a buyer, my job is done when I go into the showrooms and when I see the collections. It's very, very important for me to find the right designers that are following all the right processes. However, that cannot be the reason, and I keep repeating that to all these designs that are coming out right now, that they think that if they have a brand that is, it ticks all the boxes in terms of sustainability, that's enough to be successful, because it's not. You have, and I find myself quite a lot of times in a position where I want to support a brand and a designer as a buyer, where they can bring both of the things. An amazing collection, a great collection, with all the right terms and all the right principles on the collection. But if only one applies, it's very difficult for us as a buyer, but also within the industry, to support a brand where, it could be sustainable 100%, but is not looking good. I'm sorry about saying that, but it's because I find it most of the times right now, young designers, repeating themselves to me, and they say the only thing that, which is a great thing, but the only thing that they have to say about a collection is that. And I'm like, it's great that you have done that part, but the part of having a great collection is missing. When you have both, it's an absolute winner.
Right.
And we go 100% into it, we support it, and customers actually, you know, are asking and want this change as well.
Yeah, yeah. Rahemur, how do you feel about that? Because obviously, I mean, it's really tough as a designer, isn't it, to not just to create a really great original collection, but to bring in all these other strands around, you know.
Yeah, no, because I think the key is where you were saying about sustainability is that it's more than just the word sustainability, and it's more than textiles, it's people. And I think a lot of, like in Bangladesh in particular, there's like 4 million people who are employed within the fast fashion industry. If it's not sustainable to just cancel out all of fast fashion, because that's 4 million people who have an industry to go to. So unless more people invest in other ways or other industries and not tanning leather, because that's another thing that's coming up as well in Bangladesh, just another industry for all these people to go to, then it's not sustainable. Then we actually haven't done what we want to do. We're just cancelling one for the other.
Yeah.
I think it's right. We're somewhere in between. The solution is somewhere in between, but we just have to find, because Fashion Week can be amazing. It's just we've got to shift and see where we can go to.
And it's a great advocate, I'm so sorry, it's a great advocate. If the right change happens within, it's going to become the great advocate, because you need a vehicle, a powerful, super powerful vehicle to be able to champion that message. Because what happens at the moment is you need a collective thinking and the right platform to express all this positive change. If you don't have the vehicle and if you don't have the platform, you know, then it's going to be a very individualistic sort of way of doing things. So I think this is what is really important. So in that sense, London Fashion Week and every Fashion Week, I mean, we shouldn't only point out London Fashion Week, but we are in London and, you know, London Fashion Week begins today officially. But it is a very, very important vehicle and can become and can play that part, knowing the people supporting British Fashion Council, they can become that champion.
I have to say, I totally agree with the thing in the sense that London has really produced an enormous amount of creativity. But I do have to say, going back to what you were saying, that for a creative industry, fashion is really not very creative at all when it comes to the fashion weeks, because, I mean, this is an opportunity. And, you know, I really, really share the urgency and the fear. But there is something inside me that nevertheless thinks that if we are going to champion change, we need to champion diversity, and we need to champion lots of tiny, small brands that can, in their quantity, defy the hugeness to a certain extent. And I think in London we have that opportunity. And I see what you mean, that design needs to be good, but we also need variety for taste. I mean, you know, I wouldn't buy from Roberto Cavalli if it was the most sustainable, because I just don't like it.
Yeah.
You know, and it's my personal taste. So, but we need to have the space for these discussions, as you were saying. We need to turn fashion absolutely the other way around. And so you can live that fearfully, because it does need to happen tomorrow, and no fashion pact is fast enough or anything like that. Or you can look at it while we're still here, positively and creatively. Personally, I don't know whether we're here to fight the war or to keep the legacy going, but a sense of joint action, I feel.
You two have a lot of power as new gen, you know, to really bring the right designs and to change the whole conversation. Are you doing the right outreach? Are you just getting the same colleges and the same students? Or the same
I think
recent graduates
it's my
applying?
first year, and I've seen some change. I certainly champion and mentor designers from all over the world, from India to Hong Kong. In all, you know, I will click onto either a talent or a story, and I think we need to bring more and more and more of that. But you see, if a student comes out of college and thinks, I need to become Prada, that in itself is quite frightening. If we give them agency to say, you can just come out and be who you are. And Stavros, actually, you are brilliant at doing that. Your support for designers has been, you know, phenomenal. So my suggestion is that we really, really need to discuss the pros and cons of how to push this new generation that is genuinely innovating and genuinely turning things around, while at the same time rapidly decrease the impact of the rest of the industry.
We have to come back to the fact that the industry is insanely polluting. It emits more, has a bigger carbon footprint than aviation and shipping combined. And one of the things I'm really concerned about is the scale of the problems that we face.
Yeah.
And we're talking about these amazing young designers, yourself, Bethany, innovators who have a completely different approach to design, to society, to creating brands that are social enterprises as much, and drivers for change in that way, as much as they are brands that, companies that clothe us. But we also have this huge problem. It's this, this big systemic problem. None of us in this room have caused it. We are all subject to it. And I think we have to really, address the problem that these big brands are causing. But fashion, the fashion industry is set to rise by 63% by 2030. That's a huge explosion in production and manufacturing. And we genuinely, we're really concerned about the workers, but we've got a lot of workers who are living in developing countries who are on the first line of climate change. And, Bangladesh, there's sort of 1 in 7 people will be displaced through climate change, and by 2030 again. So we have these kind of rises and drivers in production, this massive overall kind of contribution to climate change by the industry. So there has to be at some point, and this is again back to XR and calling for a citizens' assembly where people, individuals and the industry and experts can come together and try and work out what to do, because business as usual is killing us, and we have no fashion on a dead planet.
Yeah, but we have to be accurate as well, and it is the textile industry that is second only to aviation, not the fashion industry. So if we're going to be talking about cancelling fashion, then we need to go back to the source, and then we need to go to the textile fairs, then we need to look at interiors. We can't look at things so I have 5 fingers. If my thumb decides to do its own thing, these guys are going to suffer. So we can't keep separating these issues.
No, absolutely.
They're all
absolutely.
linked.
But this is
and
it.
So
we are
I know
all
the metaphor.
linked.
I understand.
Yeah.
I do understand. But the point is that I believe right now we need accuracy of communication so that people can make genuinely informed choices. And so as we speak about fashion, we need to talk about textile, as we need to talk about transport and plastic and people. And if we keep singling one industry and making it responsible for the change or the vehicle for that change, we're going nowhere.
But we
because
can't,
fashion encompasses everything from agriculture to communication.
Yeah.
So unless we grab the other industries and say, hello, collaboration.
We have to do that, and we're only here talking about fashion because it's a show studio and we all work in fashion. But absolutely, we are all implicated, and whilst that can be frightening, it's also incredibly empowering and exciting because human beings are insanely creative. The fashion industry is insanely creative and innovative. There are amazing people coming up with fantastic solutions, and that's where the focus needs to be on calling for these solutions rather than parading out a bunch of clothes that.
I think that in the same way, for me, cancellation is a cop-out because you have this big organisation which could be one of your biggest tools in order to make change. And as a marketeer...
But that's what we were calling for. So cancellation of the shows and instead a presentation and a platform to communicate all of this. So, yeah, completely agreeing with you.
I suppose in what you were saying, this whole showmanship, this, the show goes on at any cost and that sort of spectacle, that's how I feel, to be honest with you, about a funeral for fashion, for Fashion Week. I feel like it, for me, culturally feels a little bit tone deaf, and it doesn't tackle getting into the nuts and bolts of the solution. It's a momentary...
It doesn't fix the system.
It doesn't. It's a fleeting... It's just another spectacle. It's a fleeting spectacle. It won't change anything. People will have forgotten about it. It's one of those things that, I suppose...
Absolutely.
No, go on.
No,
you go.
I'm thinking because I'm thinking about all these really emerging designers, young designers, graduates, that I'm currently working with or talking to and to create things together. And you can see definitely the shift there, 100%. I mean, there is no given. And the first thing, and Orsola will know this as well very well, is that the first discussion we're having, and I see in the course of 10 years I'm doing this, that the conversation itself has changed. The goal of the designer has changed. They're not starting with, I want to become the new Prada. They're not starting, I want to take over the world. They're like, I don't want to be that. I want to be my own individual self, doing my own thing, and I don't want like to get into this mechanism that I have to produce and produce and produce and produce. So everything is going back to a new place. So it's eventually the Fashion Week that supports, of course, shows and presentations are going to move towards that direction of supporting that new way of presenting. Because in the end of the day, the reason why Fashion Week has been created, and every single Fashion Week has been created, is for press and for buyers. Press, because they need, and this is something very important which I have discussed so many times with the designers, when I tell them, because my personal opinion to them is do not do presentations and do not do shows. So the first thing that I'm talking always about it, but I'm talking from a business perspective. I say it's too costly, it's too bad, don't get into it. I keep saying to every single person, unless you reach a moment in a place where that then you can use back to your business. But it's a huge problem there, so all the fashion weeks have been created because the press, for example, sometimes they say, I cannot publish your catwalk if I don't have catwalk pictures. I cannot publish your collection if I don't have catwalk images.
Revolves around
that's
style.
the tyranny of the mainstream, and that's what I mean for a creative industry. We're not very creative, because that's boring. We need to defy that.
Yeah. So we start like a different type of discussion. Then the buyers, do not need to be always, like going into the shows and presentations. You can scout and find designers from every single angle, and that's why I say to young designers, invest on good digital lookbooks. Photograph your collections in a good, clear way, send them out to the press and buyers, and that's what you need to do, invest your money within, so you have.
So as a buyer, would you be happy to look at those digitally, or do you still have to fly somewhere to a showroom to have a look at?
The reality is, I really have to see the garments in clothes.
Right. So you're still on the plane?
Yeah, I'm still on the plane. I'm still on. I have like to be in the showroom, wherever that showroom is. I have to see the actual physical garments, because my job is that, I have to buy something where the customer is going to go in. It could look amazing on a picture, but if you see the production, the quality, then it might not be the right one. So it is important.
Just before we hand over to our wonderful audience, I just want to talk about the role of education in all of this, because it seems to me that you go and you do a fashion degree, and the absolute aim of that degree is to have a runway show at the end. And, the colleges totally perpetuate this whole idea of the runway conveyor belt, which it is when you're graduating from college. You are on this conveyor belt. You're just, it's churning past. The Royal College of Art have tried in the last 2 or 3 years to really change the format of the fashion show and to question what a fashion show is. And I'm wondering if we feel that colleges need to do more, not just in preparing students to come out and actually be responsible designers, but also in the way that they're presenting their shows at the end. Should there be more work put into that rather than, obviously colleges are cash strapped, they're resource strapped. It's another thing for them to think about. But
we need to look at completely different techniques as well as vision. So I actually spent a few days ago, I had an interesting conversation with the king of recycling in Italy, the guy from Prato, who is literally recycling the majority of the world's, recyclable fabrics. And, he is outspokenly in favor of eco-design being taught again rigorously. Because if everything was designed to disassemble, we wouldn't be recycling 1%. We would be recycling a whole lot more. That's a technique. It's relatively simple. It requires knowledge, measuring, and so on. So it needs to sit within fashion education. And equally the vision, understanding that the show is the end of the tunnel, but that there are other ways of showing. So totally fundamental.
And this is a radical shift, and it's totally possible. It's also really exciting, back to the innovation and creativity and the scope and the potential. And I think but currently there are shifts happening and we need to make them faster. We've got a generation of kids, if we don't solve the climate crisis, and I'm sorry to keep going back to that, but it is,
it's your job.
It's my job, and that's what I'm here for. And it trumps everything else. This is our planet. This is our ecosystem. Without nature, we are nothing, literally. And so you know, we need to shift this educational system, because at the moment we're educating kids in an old system that's broken for a future that may be terrifying for them.
Rahemur, are you the product of an old system?
No, I'm definitely here for the new one, and I think kind of touching on what the education element is, and I think a lot of the stuff that I do now is self-taught. So like, I taught myself to think about what happens to my garments when someone buys them and what's going to happen afterwards. That's why.
What is going to happen?
So everything I use is natural. Everything is naturally dyed. It comes from the earth, and everything is a product of the earth. So, God forbid that you are bored of the clothes that I make for you. You can bury it into the ground, and it will disintegrate, and a tree will come. Like, and there has to be a cycle. I think fashion education has to play the part in making designers think about what happens to all these clothes that you're making.
Yeah.
It is our responsibility to think about what happens all the way around. There has to be a cycle.
Yeah, here. Emma?
I think if there were credentials for you to actually show at Fashion Week, which, conversely to what you were saying, which meant that you had to start from a place of sustainability and ethics plus aesthetics, aesthetics plus ethics, whichever way round you want to do it. I think that would force creativity, that would force those collections that you want to see, that you know will also sell. And I also think it's really important, I can't remember who touched on it, or maybe I just touched on it in my head, but I think it's important that we move towards it not just being about buyers and press, it's being about the public as well, because the public do want to get involved, especially a younger generation.
Yeah.
And that's, like I said before, how we move things on, because we need to do behaviour change and education at the same time. You know, Fashion Week should be a platform for education, not just within the industry, but outside the industry. And at the moment, it's just not accessible enough.
Stavros, last word?
Oh my God!
I
hope there is not anything like a last word in this subject. You know, like I mean, we have to go full on this. I'm just saying. I just want to say that is definitely a change need to happen, and I think that I'm keep thinking. You know, a lot of discussions that we have in different like panels. I mean, I was thinking about that you were in International Fashion Showcase. And all these like great initiatives, and I know that most of the people right now are talking about even in New Gen. Most of the times the advice is, if you're too young, you don't need to enter into the whole thing of presentation. So even the same British Fashion Council is supporting that aspect of it. Of course, there are a lot of different ways, you know, of doing things, but let's hear and create the right way to go through this, because I think it's still quite a lot of confusion and unclearness about how people can make that change. But it's a right moment because everyone is listening more than ever. So, yeah, we oblige to all of you guys, because I'm definitely not an expert on that subject, but I'm much happy to follow your advice and change.
Okay, well, we have here an audience who have been listening intently to what's being said, and I'm sure you've got some comments and questions. So over to our audience.
I was wondering what you guys thought about Gucci's announcement this week that they've gone carbon neutral. And correct me if I'm wrong, but they haven't actually outlined if they're going to be reducing the amount of waste that they're producing. So I was wondering your thoughts on that and where you think the luxury market should be going in that respect.
Rahemur?
Yes.
I just think there's a new term that's come out called greenwashing. I'm not sure if anyone knows. You should Google it. It's just like, I think there's a lot of greenwashing happening, and it's like, if you don't actually look at the system that your business works in, and if you actually do want to be a sustainable brand, then be one. You don't have to just fix one little corner and then just talk about this one little corner, but the rest of it is like still part of the problem. Like, it's a system change.
So what do you think about the idea of offsetting?
Well, I mean, you know, offsetting a little bit, like I'm going to keep a really, really, really messy house, but pay for somebody to go and clean my next door neighbor.
It's symbolic of the way we live our lives in general.
Doesn't make any sense to me at all. You know, you start with your own home. So if Gucci had said, we are now going to look at our own system and make them carbon neutral rather than offsetting the mess that we're making anyway, then I would have taken that more seriously. In this case, I tend to be one that likes to celebrate the intention, but I'm afraid that in this case I don't actually see the intention really, just with offsetting. I'm sure it's the start of something, but it's not a sufficient, doesn't make enough of a contribution, I don't think.
Yeah, I completely agree with Orsola, and I think that it's, you have to change the system, and back to the system being broken, you have to change the system. Carbon offsetting, it doesn't work, it's kind of pointless, because you are still creating that massive footprint, and that's what needs to be tackled.
You should only offset the difference of what you really, really, really can't do, and for something, on your way, but offsetting without starting isn't.
And we saw Gabriella Hearst also had a carbon neutral catwalk show during New York Fashion Week. So it's obviously, this is the start of something.
But I'd also like to point out, I think it's really that we're having this conversation and people are unsure suggests how new all of this is. We are really still trying to get our head around it. What does it mean? What is carbon neutral? What is where does the carbon footprint come from? How does it differ to be like a medium-sized business or an independent designer? What are the large corporations doing? We're still struggling to understand. Brands are still struggling to get control of their supply chains and be completely transparent. The industry, because of its size and its massive expansion, is a completely unwieldy machine. So, it's a really difficult one.
I was just wondering what your thoughts on how we stop fast fashion taking over, because it seems like brands such as, it's more high street brands, but still fashion, and Boohoo, Misguided, are more and more producing vast quantities of really cheap clothes. And I find it astonishing that there's just this lack of consideration for the environment and the planet.
So while we're focusing on the catwalk and runway shows, you think actually the big
beasts are these brands, these high street brands?
It's back to legislation again, and we all of us here completely frustrated by the environmental audit committees fixing fashion reports being dismissed by Parliament, and there was some of the suggestions that were in there were actually quite gentle. They could have gone way harder and higher on so many things. And
totally.
When you've got these massive brands that are operating without impunity and producing £5 single-use plastic dresses that people are encouraged to buy once, throw away. 38 million items of clothing are bought in the UK every week, and 11 million are thrown away to landfill. Consumers. We have to have the education angle, but also we need legislation.
But how do we change it as well in terms of, Emma, you're talking about behavioural change? Yeah. How do we change people's behaviour in actually, being so addicted to this way of dressing?
Yeah, culturally, we have to get back to creativity and reminding people what fashion and style is all about, and that is creativity. It's not copying what you've just seen and painting in numbers. It's, having your creative head on and creating looks for yourself, and you can do that without going to Boohoo to buy a dress. In fact, that's pretty, defeatist. For me, I don't know what the fun and what the joy is in that. I personally don't relate to that because my way of doing style is old school. I always want to look unique. I don't want to look like any of you guys, sorry. And I want to do my own thing, and I find the best way to do that is to really dig deep and get creative with what you're wearing, and that's looking into all your...
I also want to discuss sustainable fashion is actually quite expensive to buy. Everything that I do is actually quite expensive.
Precisely.
And the reason why Boohoo is really attractive for people is that it's cheap. But people still want to be part of this system. We just have to find a new place for them to...
There is a thing called balance, and the point is that right now, garment workers producing for very, very fast fashion brands are producing by the hour, and potentially 150 they have to. So not only do we have a massive margin of error, so that an awful lot of stuff, it's been made too fast by people that haven't had time to skill, so it gets thrown away even in the factories. Then we have this. So for me, I don't boycott anything. I could so fall in love with something from Boohoo and want to buy it. But I think that the message from your generation needs to be one of care. You need to be able to tell Boohoo, I really love this skirt, but I love this skirt alone, and this skirt will stay with me, and I will treat it as if it was Gucci. I will mend it, I will repair it, I will share it, because that is you telling a fast fashion brand, I want you to slow down. I want you to give me less, because I am prepared to put the time, to put that care in that object I've bought.
What do you feel about the boycott, Rahemur, having worked in Bangladesh and seen supply chains and seen that actually, you know, this is a huge employer of millions of women?
In Bangladesh, those industries have only flourished because we've demanded for them to flourish. And I think it really does come down to if people actually cared for what they wore and wore it more than once. Oh my God, people need to wear clothes more than once.
But if a garment worker was properly skilled, as they were in Italy, when the fashion industry went there, it wasn't because we were pretty, it was because we were cheap after the Second World War. But we created a whole culture around things being well made and people being decently paid. So it is about that. It's about having an industry that makes the right amount of products for the right amount of audience. Right now, over 100 billion garments of clothes are produced every year. There's 7.7 billion of us. Where are they going? Who's wearing them? So it is about balance. I said a quote a few years ago, which is, it's not enough looking for quality in the products you buy. You must ensure that there is quality in the lives of the people who make them.
Absolutely.
It's a balanced situation.
But I also think, listening to all this, and I 100% agree with everything, is that fashion is almost like politics. You know, people are forgetting that the power is in the people, not into the brands or the corporations or anything. If the demand is going to change, and this is exactly what you were saying, Orsola, is if you voice your opinion and you say, I don't want this anymore, you know, I don't want to buy, you know, a garment like this, or, you know, want to have something that I see all the principles within it, then as soon as, and that's the reality of it, as soon as all the sales are going to drop down, they're going to see within what changes they need to take. And then this is when the machine starts changing, you know, but that comes from all of us. If the demand changes, and this is exactly where, you know, the education is coming along, where, you know, the young generation is coming along that requires things, the experience and expertise of other generations. So this is when the change happens. It's very important.
Can I just add something about the power in the consumer's hands? Because we have so much we have autonomy over our own lives. Full stop. And it's so easy to forget that, because on a daily basis we are bombarded with sort of advertising, influencers, ideas about consumption across every single aspect of our lives. And I can't imagine how it must feel to be a young person just completely kind of sucked in by social media and being fed all of this kind of ideas every single day about what I should be doing with my life in order to feel happier and more empowered and, you know, more in touch with things, which ultimately often comes down to buying more crap that we don't need. And so, you know, I would advocate for, you know, everybody becoming their own kind of citizen activist and using these channels to re-empower themselves and communicate all of these messages. Like Orsola was saying to the brands and saying, this is enough. I don't want this. I do not want to be continually bombarded with, you know, stuff that is taken from the earth that is going to impact on my future. I want things that have stories and power and I can treasure. I want things that empower the people at the other end of the production line. That's why I got involved in sustainable fashion in the first place.
So you want to fill your Instagram feed with accounts like Fashion Revolution?
Yes.
Which will be asking, you know, which will be helping you to ask who made my clothes.
We're also in the middle of Secondhand September with Oxfam, and that's a really powerful campaign, you know, inspiring people to go out and buy secondhand and really kind of embrace a different way of shopping, because we have so much stuff already made.
But on that note, it's not just about telling brands, it's about telling your friends, your family.
Exactly.
That's
everyone.
Where there's so much power that I've seen in the last kind of 5 years in the space that I'm in, you know, people are just get really inspired. If you show people how cool secondhand or whatever sustainable mode of fashion you're taking up, whether that be that you're getting into a swapping and sharing culture, you know, or you just are investing in your own wardrobe in the sense that you're going back into your own wardrobe, and rather than, you know, hearing yourself saying things like, you know, I've got a new look on today, you're telling people actively, this is what I wore yesterday. This is actually what I wore. When was it? Wednesday.
Yeah.
Wearing the same thing, you know. Like, I'm proud of that. It's cool. Like, you know. And I think especially like younger culture is much more in tune with that anyway. You know, we're seeing so much movement with people saying yes, that they'll boycott brands if they don't agree with their sustainability and ethics policy. Yes, that they will pay more money for a sustainable item. And that speaks again to a different mode of consumption where it's about saving because you care or you really want a piece. It's not just something that's throwaway for you. So yeah, I think it's about speaking about that. If that's what you're thinking, share it so that it, you know, people can feel like they're in a collective. Say
to a sales associate, go within the store and express your opinion. You know, and I have a store, so if people are coming in Machine A and they start telling me, we don't like this because of that and that, I have to listen, you know, because this is what I'm there for. So I'm going to listen, and that's the most important thing.
Okay, brilliant. I think we've got time for one more question. Another question, anybody?
I was wondering about, like, with all the companies kind of in America especially announcing that they're going to start doing clothing rental services, I was wondering what you guys thought on the ability for that to combat, like, people buying into trends and, I guess,
I'm obsessed with rental right now. This is a rent dress. I'm just loving rental. I've like literally tried all the different rental companies
Is that rented
in the UK
from?
right now. This is by rotation, which is peer-to-peer, but I also use on loan, which is just direct rental off the site. I think it's got a massive power to change things, this mode of being able to access newness. And my sort of hierarchy is always my own wardrobe, secondhand first, but then this kind of just adds an element where it's like, if I do want to feel that newness, I can. And I sort of use this as an everyday thing. It's less of a, I've heard people speak about, oh, it's only really accessible for, you know, do's and special occasions, but I think that's completely wrong, and I think we are seeing a real interest, even though it's really young in the UK, we're seeing a real interest, and I, you know, have done a bit of consulting in that area, and I feel like it's going to be the next big thing.
Is that a threat to you, Stavros, or are you going to be embracing the rentals?
Oh no, I mean, I really don't think that something like this is threatening to the traditional retail whatsoever. I mean, there are so many ways. As a retailers, you know, right now what we're called to do is actually presenting all the time new concepts and new stories that we have to give to our customers. It has changed, even though the way of selling is traditional. You know, the demand of the customer has changed so rapidly right now. I think rental could be very, very exciting. Vintage is very, very exciting. All these different ways, and this is how people are dressed anyway. You know, it's not one or the other. It's actually a mix of all these good principles that they can come together. You know, they can rent, and then they can buy from a vintage store, and then they can come in another retailer and buy a new item that they have saved money and investing into, and they have only one item. I think a lot of times people are asking me what is going to change within, you know, the next 2 or 3 years, and what will be your biggest challenge. And my biggest challenge, and I think in a lot of people, especially retailers and online stores, is that we have to somehow inform our customers to shop less but shop better, and that's completely you know, contradictory to what retailers are and online stores are about. So the business models have to change completely about how you're going to convince your customer to not spend too much but spend wisely. But we're up for the challenge. I think this is going to be the future, you know, like, and I really want to do this with Machine A as well. Yeah.
Okay, brilliant. Okay, so buy less, buy better, and London Fashion Week is going ahead this week. I'm sure there will be some disruptions. to the normal service. I think there's some activations today, Alice. I'm looking at you.
Yes.
Yes. Yes. And there's the funeral will go ahead on
Tuesday. Yeah, at 5:30.
Okay. Great. Thank you all very, very much to all the panelists. And for more extensive Fashion Week coverage, be sure to visit showstudio.com. And if you're watching via Show Studios YouTube, be sure to like, comment and subscribe below. And we'll see you next time.